Hey folks, this is Casper, and it's now August 11th, just shortly before midnight on August 11th, and I'm finally getting around to explaining what's going on with my poker videos starting this summer on July 1st. So you may have seen this tracker in some of my poker videos recently, and you're going to definitely see it again until I either win or lose this challenge. But for now, in this video, we're going to be taking a look at exactly what it is I'm doing in this challenge to begin with. So I've created a few documents here to help me explain the terms and conditions that all the competitors in this challenge have agreed to, because the long form is a little bit too complicated, and honestly, even in the short form, you may need a few watches in order to understand it. However, one of the documents that I created for this is an Excel sheet that's going to help you understand the simplified version of the terms and conditions that we're going to look at right now. So here's the simplified version of the terms and conditions, and I'm going to read through these one by one, and then I'm going to bring up the standings, which is going to help you understand all of these terms and conditions. So the basic gist of it is that each competitor in this challenge is going to start with the same bankroll allowance, which in our case is $100 Canadian, and then each of us are going to compete with everybody else in the challenge in order to fulfill one of the win conditions before fulfilling a lose condition. So even though each one of us has the opportunity to win some money by building the bankroll itself, starting with that initial allowance, mainly what we're competing for here is the prize pool. So each competitor bets on themselves in order to create this prize pool, and losing competitors have to pay the distance between their current bankroll and the leader's current bankroll. Now, the beauty of the structure of this challenge is that each competitor gets to choose how much money they want to risk in order to try to win the prize pool. And this is known as the risk level. So each competitor chooses their own maximum risk level for the prize pool, and this risk level can be adjusted later on a weekly basis every time we report to each other our current standings. And what's nice about this is that no competitor can lose more than their max risk. So coming into this challenge, even though everybody is starting with the same bankroll, we can each have wildly different risk levels and still be competing in the same way. So as you'll see later in the video when I give examples and bring up the standings and stuff like that, this risk level, this ability to choose your own maximum risk is what adds a great deal of the strategy within this challenge. So there's a lot of different ways that each player can approach this and continue changing their approach over time, and that's part of what keeps it so interesting and also what keeps it competitive. So now let's get into how you actually win and lose, and we'll start with the win conditions right here. So the first win condition is to outlast the other competitors. That is, be the last one standing where all the other competitors have met one of the lose conditions. And the second way you can win this is by making a deal, and we'll get to the details of that later. Now, as for the lose conditions, the first way and the most common way is to lose your entire allowance, which is the equivalent of the $100 Canadian that we're all starting with. The second way is to reach your maximum risk level, which is what I described up here. The third way is to forfeit. And the fourth way, once again, is to make a deal, but in this case it would be the losing end of the deal. Now, the full written agreement that all of us have committed to in order to take part in this challenge is several pages long. And so what I've done here at the bottom in the notable rules section is whittled that down to what I believe are the most relevant points within that document. And just like the previous sections, if you don't understand exactly what I mean by any of this, don't worry, the examples that are coming very shortly are going to help explain all of it. But for now, let's run through the ones that I have written down here anyway. So first off is that only the cash balance is counted towards the bankroll standings. So tournament dollars do not count, tournament tickets do not count. Any kind of currency that is not your active cash balance does not count towards your standings. Next up, we have the clarification of what I said earlier in the win conditions and the lose conditions under make a deal. So any deal made must include 50% or less of initial competitors. So what this rule is designed to do is avoid a situation where most of the field is aiming for a particular player. So it's like an anti-collusion rule. And in this case, in 2022, we started with 5 competitors. So what that means is that only 2 competitors out of the 5 are allowed to make a deal. Because if it was 3, it would be more than 50% of the initial competitors. And the next one on the list is that competitors may use backers, but may not be backed by active competitors. And this is a rule that's basically made for me because, as everybody in this challenge knows, I operate a venture fund, and that fund does actively invest in a lot of poker players. Although I guess a couple of the other guys do as well. So anyway, the point is if you're still in this challenge, if you have not yet been eliminated, You are not allowed to invest in any of the other competitors. And once again, this is sort of like an anti-collusion rule, because if one of us bought a piece of 3 other players but didn't buy a piece of the 4th, then it would be like everybody against that 4th player, and that would create an unfair advantage. Next up, we have competitors may use Stars coin to win prizes, but must start the challenge with less than 2,000 Stars coin. So I didn't write it out here, but there were a couple of things we were allowed to start with and not start with. For instance, you couldn't have any tournament dollars, you couldn't have any tournament tickets, you had to burn those or use them or whatever. However, because there were a couple of us that did have quite a bit of Stars coin, we all eventually negotiated that 2,000 is the limit. If you have more than that, you have to spend it off before the start of the challenge, which everybody did. And next up we have any withdrawals made following the start date may be redeposited later, minus 5% of withdrawn amounts. And once again, this is a rule kind of created for me, exclusively me, because I was the only one who was really interested in making any withdrawals, which was a reflection of my experience in the last couple of challenges like this that I've done. Because in the last ones, we were allowed no withdrawals whatsoever, and it created a problem that led to sort of an anti-competitive effect. And I won't get into that, but the point is you are allowed to make an unlimited number of withdrawals. However, you're only allowed redepositing 95% of whatever it is you withdrew. And the reason for that 5% surcharge is simply because it's more work in order to verify that nobody's cheating in the way that we prove what it is we're doing and transaction histories and stuff like that. It's just more work. And so everybody agreed that withdrawals are okay, but you just have to pay a little bit of a surcharge. And finally, we have each late report will result in a charge of $10 USD or a 2% charge on the final tally. So a 2% removal of whatever it is that your ending bankroll is. And it's whichever is greater between those two. And the reason for this is because we all want to have updated numbers as much as possible. And so every Monday, we're in charge of submitting our own reports, which we do usually via email or by phone or some kind of video proof or photo proof of our bankrolls. And so if you're late on this, you get charged. And then if you're late 3 times, you're automatically eliminated on the 3rd time. So simply put, this last one is just an incentive for everybody to be reporting their current bankroll on time. So that's it for the rules, or at least the simplified version that I decided to write for this video. And if you're confused about any of this, don't worry. Like I said, this is the time right now where we're going to take a look at the current standings. And hopefully a lot of this is going to be cleared up because I'm going to run through a few of the possible outcomes. And using a bit of experimentation and examples, you will be able to better understand all the stuff that I outlined here on this sheet. Okay, so now that that's settled, let's get into the standings. So these are the current standings. The everybody else but me is updated to last Monday, which is 5 days ago. My stats, however, are updated to right now. So as we speak right now, I have 189.75 in my bankroll, as you can see in this column here. So let's just run through the columns real quick and go through what each one of them means. So in the name column, we have the aliases that I'm using for this video in order to protect everybody's identity. In the status column, this is the Canadian dollar value of everybody's total bankroll right now. So everything combined. The max risk, you can see what everybody's risking. The allowance, this is what everybody has left to buy in with. And you can see that I'm the only one with any money left to buy in with. And that is because A, I'm the only one who started with less than the $100 allowance, and B, I'm the only one who withdrew. So my withdrawal was worth $31.30, and I only bought in initially for $50. So that leaves me with $81.30 worth of allowance. In the bankroll column, we have the actual PokerStars balance. So this is what shows up in the lobby when you open the cashier screen. In the final result, we have everybody's finishing rank. You can see that 2 players are already eliminated, which is hilarious, and I'll get to that in a minute. And in the prize pool column, we have what each player who's been eliminated already has paid to the prize pool. So each time a player meets one of the lose conditions, we calculate what it is they owe. And in this case, Steve paid $239 and Nick paid $187, which, as you can see at the top, gives us a total current prize pool of 426 Canadian. So now that you understand what you're seeing, I'm going to discuss strategy a little bit and go through a few examples of what's necessary in order to meet both lose conditions and win conditions. So I've got the rules summary on the bottom here, and then the current standings on the top. So what we're going to do is play with the numbers a little bit and change the inputs, and you'll be able to see how some of the win and lose conditions can be met. But before I do that, just a reminder of how the prize pool works. Losing competitors must pay the distance between their current bankroll and the leader's current bankroll. So both of the players who were eliminated, both Steve and Nick, were eliminated because they met this lose condition, which is that they lost their entire allowance. And at the time that they lost their allowances, the distance between their $0 left and the current leader were these amounts over here in the prize pool section. So even though neither of them reached their max risk, they were out of the competition because they had no more money. And at the time that they reported no more money, the leader had these amounts respectively. So what I find particularly hilarious about this is that Nick is the one, I mean, we all did a lot of chirping. This whole competition is basically just the result of us chirping each other, and everybody in this competition, all 5 competitors, truly believes that they're a better poker player than everybody else in the competition. That's largely why we're participating. And one of the ones, like arguably the one who did the most chirping, was Nick. He was like, "You guys are going down. You suck. You're never going to do anything cool." And what's the best about his elimination was that it took place before the first reporting period. So he didn't even last 7 days. He lost his whole bankroll in less than 7 days. And he got a discount as a result because at that time, John was the leader, and he had 187 Canadian in his status column. And so that's what Nick had to pay. And then just recently, about a week and a half ago, Steve also lost the rest of his bankroll. And at that time, he, the distance, like I said, between him and first was $239. But now let's play around with the numbers a little bit, and you'll see how this is both a race, like a sprint and a marathon at the same time. Because, for instance, like Max right now has 69.90 as his status. And if he were to suddenly go broke, like if he reports that he's broke next Monday and these other statuses stay the same, Max is going to have to pay $323. Or actually $324 because we round off to the nearest dollar. So if, let's say, me and John both hold exactly these same bankrolls and Max goes broke, we'll simulate what that looks like. We'll put a 0 for his bankroll. So now once he goes broke, he has to pay the distance between his current 0 and the status of the leader, which in this case would be me at 324. So in that case, he would have to add $324 to the prize pool, and that would jack it up all the way to $750. And so both of the players who went broke, like I said, they went broke by losing their entire allowance, which is the most common way that players lose. However, where a lot of the strategy comes in is in the risk level. And you can see one of the lose conditions is to reach the maximum risk level. So unlike losing your entire allowance, which is based on something you're doing, reaching the maximum risk level is generally a result of somebody else's work. And that's where the sort of race factor comes in, because you can see right now that I'm currently in the lead and I have 323.53 as my status. However, my max risk is $500 Canadian. So if either one of these other players gets up to $823.54 as their status, then I'm going to automatically lose. I'm going to be eliminated. And we'll see, I'll do an example here to show you what that looks like. Let's say next reporting period, John reports that he has $800. So that would bring his status up to 1,021. And as you can see, 1,021.26 minus 323.53 gives us 697. And 697 exceeds my max risk. And so I would be eliminated right then and there. However, I would not have to pay the distance between my current bankroll and John's 1,000 because my max risk is 500. And the maximum you can lose is the amount that you have listed currently as your max risk. So even though I've used 800 as a report example, whatever, we could go to $1 million. Let's say John, all of a sudden, for however the hell he may do it, he makes $1 million, even though there's over, 1.27 million in between him and my current bankroll, I'd still only lose 500. And because Max is also risking 500, as you can see here, both of us would only lose 500. So in that case, this is what it would look like. We'd both have to pay $500 to the prize pool because our max risk were both met. So we would have met condition number 2, where we reached the max risk level. And in that case, we would each add $500 to the prize pool, which would leave John as the only player left in the challenge, and John would therefore win $1,426, which is the entire amount that went into the prize pool. However, what you'll notice about this case is that, me and Max would not be down exactly $500. Now, we each put up $100 Canadian in order to have a bankroll, and then we also have a max risk level. So in this case, my total buy-in would be 600 because 500 plus 1, and that would be the same case for Max. However, you can see that we'd still, at the time we lose, we would still have a bankroll that's worth something. So in this case, I would be in for 600, which is 500 plus 1. However, I would get a little bit of a discount because I built my bankroll up. So my net loss in this situation would actually only be 276.47. And then Max, who also lost a gross amount of 600, we'd take away his current bankroll, which is 69.90, and in this case, he would experience a net loss of $530.10. So we're going to back it up and take a look at a bit more realistic example. I blew it up into extremes so that you could see how the max risk protects everybody from excessive loss. And in that case, the example that I just gave, John achieved win condition number 1, which was outlast all the competitors. Steve and Nick hit the lose condition number 1, which is lose their entire allowance. And then Max and I would have hit lose condition number 2, which is reach the maximum risk level, which was achieved by John running away with that hypothetical $1 million bankroll. But now let's take a look at something a bit more realistic and more interesting, because what we just looked at was one player running away with it and winning very quickly. And even in this case, this is the 3rd time I've done this. And even with fewer players, nobody has gone broke as quickly as Nick did. He actually set a record, which is hilarious. And even Steve was pretty fast at, a month and a week or something. It was like 5 weeks and 2 players went broke. However, what generally happens is that multiple players will be building a bankroll at similar rates. And so it becomes a challenge of how fast do you move up in the stakes? What kind of games do you play to try and get ahead of your competitors? And the other strategy point that's really interesting is the ability to adjust your max risk throughout the challenge. On every reporting period, each player has an opportunity to adjust their max risk. So let's look at another example. We'll use Max this time as the guy who's the hero. Let's say that next Monday, Max reports a bankroll of $410. And we'll suppose that both me and John stayed at the same level. So what I would be seeing here, if Max reported this bankroll, I'd be like, oh shit, he's $200 ahead of me and my max risk is 500. So if he wins, if he distances himself another 300 from my current bankroll, I'm going to get stopped out and I'm going to lose because I will have achieved my max risk level. So at that time, I may decide, okay, you know what? I'm doing well in this thing. I'm going to bump my max risk level up to 1,000. And what that's going to do is give me an extra little wiggle room to try and catch up to whoever's the leader, which in this example would be Max at 523.39. Now, so far in these examples, we've looked at situations where John does not lose. And as you can see, he has a max risk level of $10,000. And just as a side note, I'll mention that none of these max risk levels have been changed so far. These are what we all decided to start the competition with. So let's actually, I'm just going to clean this sheet up a little and make it clearer that Nick and Steve are already gone. So in the status column, it's a little bit easier to read now. And let's look at some of the situations in which John might lose. And in doing so, you'll be able to see how unlikely it is that he's going to be eliminated by reaching his max risk level. Now, obviously, he's taken a lot of risk in order to achieve this kind of freedom, but it's nevertheless possible for him to achieve this level, and that is clearly what the rest of us are really aiming to do. So let's use, once again, an unrealistic example where, let's say, I buy in to like an $11 super huge tournament, like a Micro Millions or something, and I end up winning the thing. All of a sudden, I win a huge tournament. And let's say I end up with a bankroll of, I don't know, $9,000. And once again, we're going to assume that the other two players stayed the same. So this is the kind of result that would be needed in order for John to get stopped out by condition number 2, which is reach the maximum risk level. So once again, in this case, Max would only lose $500. He would only add $500 to the prize pool. And in this case, the distance between my bankroll and John's bankroll would be more than John's max risk. So in this case, he would have to pay $10,000 to the prize pool, which would bring it up to a whopping $10,926. And keep in mind that we each started with only $100 Canadian as our allowance. So we all only bought in for $100. So in this case, I would not only win the $10,926 in the prize pool, but I would also be up over $11,400 on my actual balance. So if this were to happen, which again is unlikely, it's an extreme scenario. However, it's worth noting that, I would have converted a total risk of $600, which is my max risk plus my allowance, into, over $22,000 of earnings. And in the previous examples where John was the winner, so when both me and Max hit our max risk levels and we added $500 to the prize pool, in that case, John won a small amount, or a relatively small amount, at around $1,400. And in order to win that $1,400, he had to risk $10,000 plus his buy-in of $100, so $10,100. So what you can see about all these rules and all these examples is that there are a lot of different levels of strategy that each player can go with and continue adjusting throughout the competition. So what you can see about John, for instance, he's kind of like making a statement. He's saying, I have more money than you guys, and I don't think you're going to get to this level. So he posted $10,000 and was indirectly saying, I don't think you guys can run a bankroll up from $100 to $10,000. So what he's trying to do, his main strategy, is wait for the rest of us to go broke. He's making a statement that he thinks that all of us are going to go broke before he reaches his max risk level. And so he's giving himself a ton of time to be successful himself. And then conversely, on the bottom side, we have 3 players risking $500, including myself. And what we're saying is that I don't think you're capable of running up a bankroll. Me personally, I don't think any of these 4 players have what it takes to beat the micro stakes and to safely run up a bankroll. I believe that I'm the only one who has what it takes to play micro stakes and focus on them, because I'm the only one who not only doesn't care about money, but actively hates it. And so I'm not impressed by high stakes. Whether I'm playing for $1 or whether I'm playing for 10,000, it doesn't make a difference on, how much I care about the win. My caring about the win is determined by my competitiveness rather than a love for money. However, Steve and Nick, and actually pretty much all of them, they all enjoy money. They like to buy things. They like to own things. And so they're very much interested in getting there quickly. And some of them, in fact, which is what my strategy is based on, some of these players, they're too embarrassed, or there's like a negative stigma in their minds about playing low stakes. They think it's silly to play low stakes. And it just so happens that that's exactly how these 2 players went broke as quickly as they did. Nick and Steve both started with $100, and they immediately jumped into cash games of, 10, 25 cent PLO, which is a game in which you can lose a bankroll like that instantly. And that's exactly what happened to Nick. He went broke in what turned out to be 3 days, even though we didn't learn about it until the first reporting period. He took only 3 days, and he was playing, 25, 50 cent pot limit Omaha. And in, a couple bad hands took place, and all of a sudden he doesn't have money left. But anyway, I'm going to close this video here. I think you get the point by now. And you'll see as this challenge progresses, because I'm doing well now, and I intend to continue doing well. So I'll be updating you guys on how it's going. And when I make final tables or go deep in, special tournaments that are impactful towards this challenge, I will screen record and narrate, and you'll be able to see a little bit about my approach, even though you won't be able to see their end of it. Although, come to think of it, I suppose I could keep this document here. This was meant to be just temporary to explain this video, but I suppose I could also keep this on the side in addition to the actual tracker with all the personal information on it. And so I could bring this up periodically and show you how everybody's doing and what the standings are. because I predict that this is going to take a while. In my mind, when I started it, as soon as I heard that John wanted to post $10,000, I was like, okay, this is going to take 2 years to win, basically. So this is a long-term thing in the minds of most of us. Like basically everybody down here understands that it's going to be a long-term thing. We're not just going to make $10,000 overnight in order to get John out of there. And that's especially true because we can continue to adjust our risk levels, right? Like let's suppose that I get heads up. Let's do one more example, and we'll say that I have a bankroll next week, next reporting period of $600, and let's say that Max goes broke. So Max is going to get stopped out, and he's going to reach the lose condition number 2, and he's going to pay $500 to the prize pool. So he's going to be eliminated, as I'm denoting right here, and what that's going to do is leave me and John heads up. So in this case, because I now have $800 of a cushion in my bankroll, I might decide, okay, you know what? I'm going to boost up my max risk up to 1,000. And let's say a few weeks later, I get up to 1,400 because I went up in the stakes. So now my bankroll's higher. And let's say John also boosts his bankroll a little bit up to 500. Now, because I have this much more of a cushion, I might decide, you know what, John, you want to be tough about this? Okay, fine. I'm going up to 2,500 now. And this is going to continue. It's going to continue escalating more and more and more. But because we're going to be winning money in our bankrolls, we're going to be able to afford to increase the risk. And so even though I'm using myself as the example of the one who got through and, who built up to a higher level, it could have been any one of us. Any one of us could have done this. And, John could have just run away with it immediately. He's another one of the ones who doesn't like to play low stakes. His very first buy-in, from what I heard, was a $22 tournament. And then from there, he didn't win that. But from there, he bought into a 10.25-cent PLO and won like $150 in a matter of half an hour. And so, all of the players in this challenge are experienced poker players with a lot of game, even though we all think they're the best. And I personally think I'm better than everybody, not only at poker in general, but at building a bankroll. They nevertheless have skill. It's not like these are a bunch of fish. And, they have a lot of experience. Everybody here has more than 10 years experience in playing poker. And so everybody has a chance. And what this is going to develop into has yet to be seen. But as I've shown in these examples, there are a lot of possibilities. There's a lot of opportunity for adjusting strategy. And there are a lot of different outcomes that could possibly come out of this. So anyway, that's going to be a wrap for this one. I think I went through everything fairly thoroughly. A few notes to close here is that there is no end date to this. The end date is determined by the fate of each player. And, so it could be over in a matter of weeks. It could be over in a matter of years. Most commonly, I've done this, like I said, this is my third one of these that I did. And in the last two, both of the last two were finished with the top 2 players making a deal and deciding to end it and chopping up the money. And kind of a sad note here is that I finished second both of the other times. Although I did make money overall both times, I was officially a loser both times, finishing second. And another note is that I'm the designer here. I've been betting props for nearly 20 years now, many times semi-professionally. I have engaged in a couple of pretty high-stakes challenges. And although this isn't the biggest prop bet I've ever made, it's certainly up there. It's in the top 5 in terms of win potential. And I'll also note that $10,000 is by far the highest risk level we've had. The other 2 challenges, the first one, the max risk, never was higher than 500 for any of the players. There were 3 players in both of the first 2 challenges of this sort. And, it was like risk levels of 100 to 500. It was a much, much smaller. And this time we've decided, as soon as John posted the 10,000, everybody kind of raised their planned risk level. And so we're each gambling a little bit more than we normally would on our own performance. And the last thing that I want to mention here is about my tracker. I've decided that I'm going to change something about the way I've been tracking, mainly the percentage, the ROE percentage, and the total buy-in. Because I realized that, after going up above $200 bankroll a couple of times recently, I dropped back below consistently. And for me, I don't want to get deep into it, but there's like a mental problem that happens when I take drawdowns in an account. I don't do well, whether it's day trading stocks or playing poker. I tend to not handle drawdowns very well. And so one of the ways that I deal with this is I withdraw money from my bankroll to make my bankroll smaller, to put more pressure on myself to perform. And you can see an example of that right here on this day, where I took out almost half my bankroll in order to put pressure on myself, and then immediately finished second in a big tournament and got it all back. Now, I plan on doing that again from my current level. If I drop below, I believe 160, probably around there, or maybe 175, I intended to withdraw 50 in order to do the same thing and put more pressure on myself. However, what that's going to do is mess up all the math. You can see that if I were to do that, let's just simulate it right now. If I were to withdraw 50, my total buy-ins will, in the way I have it set up right now, are going to be in the negatives, which completely ruins the net ROE, which is return on equity. So the math right now it doesn't make sense for what I want to do. So I'm going to be redesigning this, in the next days or weeks. So even though I've been reporting that, yeah, my total buy-in is officially $12.63, which puts me up over 1,400%, that technically isn't the case if you consider all of the money that I have available. So anyway, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed the breakdown, and I hope you understand. If you have any comments, leave them below. And if you're my opponent left in this challenge, let it be known right now that you are going down. I am not going to finish second this time. I am going to ship it. So anyway, you can keep track of how I'm doing on this challenge. I'll be, when I post poker videos, I'll be putting Bankroll Challenge 2022 before the video. So you'll be able to know that this is part of the challenge that I'm doing here. And if I know you personally and you are comfortable, participating in something like this, the more the merrier. I would love to do this with, 20 players. It would be amazing in terms of the risk reward. So contact me if you'd like to get in on the next one. Obviously, it's likely to be a while, but I would really like to get more players than we have. Even though this is a record number of players, I still think it would be really cool. And the rules and the terms and conditions are, better than they've ever been. And if we, update them again, based on the experience that we have this time, I think it's going to be really awesome, really flexible, and ultimately completely fair. So I'm looking forward to shipping this one in a timely manner, and I'm looking forward even more to hopefully having more players in the next one.